It's a great pleasure to be here, sharing this platform with Bansi, also with Dr. Sampadananda Mishra, Acharya Vidya Bhaskar, and Dr. Ram Manohar. Very, very inspiring talks about, and I hope I was saying that after our presentation, we'll have some time to talk among ourselves, because very interesting questions have been raised here about meaning, about Sanskrit, about the different levels of speech, and I hope we have time to talk among ourselves. My presentation will go in a different line, because I'm going to speak more from an historical point of view, and I would like to speak about what I call the Third Sanskrit Revolution. And Third Sanskrit Revolution, you will see what I am meaning by that. No, just make this try. Type on your web search engine the top 10 most pirated books of 2009, and what will you see? A Sanskrit book, the Kama Sutra. You can dismiss it by saying it's not about Sanskrit, it's all about sex. But you will be missing the point. What matters here is that Sanskrit had something meaningful to say about sexology. So meaningful that even today, after more than 1500 years, it still has a strong appeal over the whole world. The same could be said, though in different degrees, about mathematics, astronomy, medicine, grammar, phonetics, computational linguistics, pharmacy, industrial chemistry, metallurgy, aesthetics, political sciences, psychology, and of course, yoga and consciousness studies. Even in gaming, the best game of strategy bears a Sanskrit name, Chaturanga or chess. The meaningfulness of Sanskrit implies that it is universal and stands the test of time. It also means that it has deeply influenced the science of other cultures. Arthur MacDonald, a well-known British scholar, wrote, "Since the Renaissance, there's been no event of such worldwide significance in the history of culture as the discovery of Sanskrit literature in the later part of the 18th century." Perhaps he was exaggerating, but we have almost forgotten what the discovery of Sanskrit meant for European scholars in the 19th century. Take, for instance, the study of language. The Europeans knew almost nothing about phonetics or the study of speech sounds. They could not distinguish between voiced and unvoiced consonants. Voiced consonants are made by vibrating the vocal cords, while unvoiced consonants do not produce such vibration. Europeans knew nothing about that in the 19th century. There are several pairs of consonants like k, g, cha, ja, pa, va, or ta, da, where the mouth position is the same, but the voice-unvoiced distinction makes them different. For example, pa and ba are both labial, because to pronounce them, you use the lips. They differ because pa is unvoiced and ba is voiced. The same could be said about ta and da. Both are dentals, because while uttering them, the tip of the tongue touches the teeth, but ta is unvoiced and da is voiced. By the way, many technical terms of modern phonetics, like labial, ostia, dental, dantia, occlusive, sparsha, aspirated, mahaprana, or voice, gosha, to mention just a few, are just translation of Sanskrit terms that were already known 2,500 years ago, while in the West, they were only known in the 19th century. Modern linguistics would have never been born without the discovery of Sanskrit by Western scholars. The grammar of Panini describes the whole Sanskrit language in 4,000 rules. If you print it, it will hardly take 40 printed pages. The rules were coded in a meta language that allowed them to be extremely brief. If you decode those into natural language, it will turn into a book of more than 500 pages. The American linguist Bloomfield said that the grammar of Panini was one of the greatest monuments of human intelligence. In fact, we could easily say that Sanskrit itself is one of the greatest monuments of human intelligence. The discovery of Sanskrit for Westerners had a profound impact, not only in linguistics, but in the social sciences of the 19th century. This is what I call Sanskrit's second revolution. The first Sanskrit revolution took place in the Middle Age, when Muslim scholars transmitted wisdom to the West, mainly through the Spanish Al-Andalus. Muslim authors such as Al-Khwarizmi in mathematics, Avicenna in medicine, Al-Farghani in astronomy, who were deeply influenced by Indian texts, made available Indian science to the West, thanks to the efforts of the Toledo School of Translators. It appears that the first Arabic numerals, in fact Indian, which were written in Europe, are in a codex at El Escorial in Madrid. And Muslim authors such as Ibn Said from Almeria, in his 11th century manuscript, Categories of Nations, did not hesitate to acknowledge his debt to the Indian world. In fact, the image of India as a land of knowledge entered Europe through the Islamic world and became common knowledge to the European Enlightenment. Voltaire saw India as the cradle of human civilization and as the inventor of numerals, chess, and didactic fables. You may say, well, this is all the past. What about the future? Can Sanskrit still deliver a third revolution? Or to put it in less strong terms, is Sanskrit today relevant to the modern world? I believe that Sanskrit is a living discipline that still can contribute to solve some of the problems raised by modern human sciences. Pardon me if for a while I go into some technicalities, but to prove my point, I would like just to mention several analytical devices that only in the 20th century were discovered in the West, but that were consciously employed by the Indian savants many centuries ago. To number just a few, the zero suffix, the distinction between language and meta-language, the usage of context-sensitive rules, the fact that grammar was conceived almost as a programming language, able to produce an infinite number of well-formed expressions. We still have not understood all the potentialities of Indian ontology and logic, nor have we tapped all the technical resources that the hermeneutics of Mimamsa can offer us. Once he was talking about the media, and I should draw the attention about the analysis of texts according to Mimamsa categories, the study of advertising messages in publicity by applying Sanskrit concepts as Shabdi Bhavana or Arti Bhavana from Mimamsa that tell us how language is able to influence the desires of people. In other areas of Sanskrit, we are witnessing the increasing interest of the modern world in such things as Sanskrit aesthetics, exemplifying the theories of rasa, already mentioned, and Dwani, which help us to understand the nature of aesthetic delight. There is interest in many areas of philosophy. For instance, the description of the human mind as a material unit of four distinct elements, buddhi, chitta, hamkara, and manas. The distinction between mind and consciousness, so blurred in the West, is essential for consciousness studies. Mindfulness as a technique of healing and concentration has become so popular that we have forgotten its Indian origin. Today, many people take interest in Sanskrit because of yoga, Ayurveda, and meditation. Sanskrit and its derived language, like Pali and the Prakrits, have a wealth of literature on the mind as an instrument of liberation and not of addiction and depression. To cut it short, there are still many things to be discovered in the Sanskrit texts that could be useful today. The problem is that to retrieve them is not an easy task. On one hand, people having a sound knowledge of Sanskrit commentaries too often show little interest in the related Western disciplines. On the other hand, people having a good understanding of today's most relevant issues, generally have a very fragmented knowledge of the Sanskrit sources. Bridges need to be built between the two worlds, and Sanskrit study should apply its efforts to the common task of bridging the gap between Eastern and Western human sciences. One thing is clear: the third Sanskrit revolution can only be started from India. If India does not take Sanskrit seriously, nobody will. And here let me finish by saying a few recommendations. And the first recommendation that I would like to make to the Sanskrit community is protect traditional Indian scholars. They are an endangered species and a storehouse of neglected knowledge. If they perish, the understanding of Sanskrit texts would become so more difficult. I had the privilege to study with Pandits in Banaras, and they are a very neglected class of people who have in them the keys to Sanskrit. Second, do not consider Sanskrit as representing a backward way of life. Sanskrit texts are full of open-minded and liberating ideas, because in some areas of the Indian society there is this idea that Sanskrit is backward. Stress is rational and liberal qualities. Be modern and use Sanskrit to decolonize your mind. At the same time, do not forget that Sanskrit is not only an analytical language, but a spiritual one, good for singing and meditating, a language for humanity and world peace, a language for dialogue. Do not link Sanskrit to a particular ideology. Even if you are a devout Hindu, make Sanskrit accessible. As Sanskrita Bharati is proof, Sanskrit can be easily and joyfully learned by those who already know an Indian language. 6. Build a strong net with foreign scholars. Sanskrit is being cultivated by small groups of people all over the world, from Japan to Argentina, from the US to Russia, from South Africa to Sweden, from Thailand to Costa Rica. 7. Be real. Do not make false claims. Sanskrit is neither the mother of all language nor the most ancient one. Sanskrit is not the most suitable language for computers. Sanskrit does not need empty claims. It has already many strong points. Strive to discover them. 8. Make Sanskrit universal, like yoga, but do not forget its Indian origin. And 9th, use Sanskrit to build a strong Indian culture with a soft heart, a culture that it is universal and non-exclusivist, open to the diversity, and that uses one of the most refined and cosmopolitan languages that human intelligence has produced, Sanskrit. To conclude, Sanskrit knowledge systems were cultivated by Indian intellectuals through centuries. These intellectuals have now mutated into a legion of Indian scientists, doctors, physicists, mathematicians, engineers, and computer wizards all over the world. India is only applying her secular genius to the field of modern science and achieving the same degree of excellence that she achieved in ancient times. That is why it is important for India not to cut its ties with the past. This is called the long-term consistency of a civilization, which lies at the root of its very survival. Sanskrit is part of this long-term consistency. Let us not dismiss it. Thank you very much. Namaskar.